Okay, here we go. So we're going to go ahead and start. It's a little bit after 12. Thank you for coming. This is our third talk, I think, right, with the LGBTI Health Initiative. And I'm really excited. Dr. Payne is a DO who we met as first years here in Dr. Waters' class, and he talked about a lot of the early fight against HIV and AIDS and showed us those pictures of HIV/AIDS patients who have who are like well into the pathology. So that's what I remember from when I was first introduced to you back then. But today is going to talk about a little bit more of the biological determination of sexual orientation. Okay, yeah. We'll make sure. But and hopefully you will all enjoy it and have lots of questions for Dr. Payne. He currently is not practicing full time, but he does a lot of research still. If you remember him from the research night, I think last year he came in with Dr. Waters and talked about the ozone treatments. That's kind of this innovative treatment for HIV patients. So if you have questions about that, maybe towards the end. And so if you'd like to start, this is Dr. Payne. Thanks for coming. Is this on now? Let's see. Possibly. It might be on battery too. Oh, there it is. Green. There, you got it. Right?
Okay. Can everybody hear okay?
Yes.
All right. What I thought I'd do today is kind of let you decide what you want to talk about. I thought I'd run through just a little bit of the biological determination of whether you're gay or not and so forth. And I got to start off and say that most of the information we're going to be presenting today has to do with men. And the research with women is very much less than it is with gay males. But we'll go through and talk about the early days and what the first things they found and how that all adds into what we know today. And so then if we have a little time, we can either talk about whatever you want to, or we can show some slides of early days of treating HIV disease, which is very different than it is now. We have well over 30 medications now to treat AIDS patients with, and so very different game. So let's see. One of the first things that was looked at in the early days of trying to figure out whether sexual orientation was biologically determined or not was the hypothalamus of a gay man. It looked like more the hypothalamus of a female. This is the INAH3, the interstitial nuclei anterior hypothalamus 3, and there's 1, 2, 3, and 4 of those. And that's the one that's different. It's near the third ventricle. And one of the doctors, Dr. LeVay, was doing some research on sectioning brains and looking at to see if anything was different between gay men and straight men. And he found that this particular instance, that there was a difference that showed up pretty much all the time. Now this is the cross-section of it, and when they first looked at this, they knew that the INAH3 area was smaller in gay men than it was in heterosexual males, but they did not know whether that meant there were fewer neurons or what it was. And I'll talk about why that's important in a second. But this is what they found at first, that it looked like there were fewer neurons then. And so, and the hypothalamus is an area that has a lot to do with sexuality and a lot of different things. It's a very primitive part of the brain. It goes way back, and most animals have it. And I'll say more about this later on too, especially about fruit flies, but there is a great deal of evidence that you've seen probably a million times for same-sex orientation in almost every animal group. So it's in all the biological areas. So, well, I'm not sure about plants, but anyway. So at first they thought that this was the case, that the smaller hypothalami had fewer neurons. But then they did another study after this first one, and they found out that that's not actually the case, that in heterosexual males, they had larger spaces between them, and that there was the same number of neurons in the gay man's INH3 region. What does that tell us? That tells us that the differentiation occurs sometime after the brain was formed, and that's in how it connects together, how the neurons connect, and how they organize themselves and so forth. It's not in actually the development of the brain, but it's in how it goes, in which direction it goes after it's all been developed. So the fact that the same number of neurons are there is interesting, because it tells us there's got to be other influences as well going on. So,
Dr. Payne,
yes?
is INAH3 the same thing as the sexually dimorphic nuclei of the three-optic nucleus in the hypothalamus?
Basically the same idea. It's there's INH 1, 2, 3, and 4, and INH 3 is really the only one that they found the big differences in, and so they started to call it that because it does tend to help differentiate people, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. So, but now the genetic locus. This is one of the biggest things that it's controversial, highly controversial, and right up here on the end is the XQ28 region of the X chromosome, and they found that this was conserved in a large number of gay men, and when they did brothers and twin studies, they found that this area also was, as you can see down here, here's the X chromosome that has this particular region on it, here in the mother, the maternal grandmother, and it can be passed on then down to, here's the gay man, and then these are brothers. 14% of brothers have the same chromosome, whether they're gay or not, and 8% of cousins, maternal cousins on your mother's side, have that same nuclei. And then there's uncles up here. Everyone has a gay uncle. Anyway, so they're trying to connect this with hereditary issues, and that is hard to do because everyone's looking for one absolute cause of what causes people to have same-sex preference. And but there are a lot of people that don't, like here the brothers, they turn out straight, but they have the same chromosome there. They have the same codon here. So and so that was kind of like, well, I don't know. Maybe this is not exactly all that we were looking for. So now the family genetics, they did PCR here, and they start, here's the mother has the CA11, that's another chromosome, and it's passed on to two sons, and you can see down here, that in two of the sons, this area is preserved, and in the mother, it's there. Whereas what's in the father here, you don't see in these sons as far as determining sexual orientation. So that was just more evidence that there was probably something genetic going on. But again, here we have random brothers, and these brothers have the same markers, and these brothers have different markers. But when you're looking at gay brothers, the XQ28 region is preserved in a much larger number of gay brothers than just random brothers. So, but you see again, there's this part right here that isn't. So we started to understand that it isn't always just the genetic makeup of somebody that determines whether they're going to have same-sex preference or not. So what else is it then? Let's come back to that one. Other factors to consider: hormonal effects. There was a study done that found that maternal testosterone, females have testosterone too, as well as males, and that maternal testosterone decreased with age. So the older the female was and the more sons she had, the more likely the younger sons were to turn out to be gay. And so, because she had less of a testosterone effect in utero on these males than she did on her first sons. Now, then there is also the SRY gene. It's on the Y chromosome instead of the X. And it prevents female development in secondary sexual traits. And it turns on testosterone. And that may be less strong in some people and stronger in others. Then epigenetics. Does anyone know what epigenetics is? It's the study of how genes, we have all these different genes, but that's not really what makes us what we are. It's what genes are turned on and what genes are turned off at any particular time. As the fetus is developing, certain genes have to be turned on to make the eye, and then they get turned off, and others to make the limb buds and so forth. So it's a matter of what's turned on and what isn't. And I was reading an article about two little twins. One was very much autistic and the other was not autistic. Even though they had the same genetic material, one was autistic and one wasn't. And the one that was autistic had a severe viral illness when she was young. And supposedly that knocked a bunch of methyl groups off the codons and caused a different exterior presentation than the sister who did not have the febrile illness. So epigenetics has something to do with it. We're not sure exactly how epigenetics works. We thought we had figured out genetics when we got the Human Genome Project done. And then we found out epigenetics is really much more important than even the genes that you have. So Freudian influences, this is the old-timey thing where a person, a male is close to his mother but distant from his father, and that's kind of been shown not to be really too important. And then there's other cultural influences: religion, ethnicity, tribal rules and memes, politics, and laws. Now, I'm going to go back. Let's go back to here. This is the vector analysis, and this is where you try to figure out what then determines if somebody is going to have an outward orientation of gay or straight. Now, these are the influences that a lot of people have in their lives that help determine that. Here is their innate orientation. Now, this is the Kinsey Scale. I think you've heard of that, the 0 to 6 scale, where 0 is completely heterosexual, 6 is completely gay, and most people fall somewhere in between. Although there are certainly double zeros and there are double sixes over here, which means they just have no interest in the double sixes have no interest in opposite sex, and the double zeros have no interest in the same sex at all. But many people fall somewhere in the middle, and a lot of people believe there is no such thing as a bisexual person, and that's really not the case. There truly are. And with women particularly, sexuality tends to be much more fluid than it is with men. They tend to go more for the other aspects of a relationship, whether the guy has a good sense of humor and so forth, or if the woman meets another woman that she really falls in love with, she can be with her or with a man. With males, it's a little more cut and dried, but even there, it's not completely. So, now if you have very little religion up here that says it's bad to be gay, and your familial influences, they don't care, it's whatever. And your social interactions are here, but you have a very strong innate orientation. This is what your outward orientation is going to be. You're going to be about a 5 or 6 on the Kinsey Scale. You're going to be pretty much outwardly a gay man. And this goes for women too, although we just don't know the intricacies of same-sex preference in women as well as men. So now down here, if you have on the other hand a very strong religious influence, strong family and strong social influence saying that that's not acceptable. In other words, your tribal rules say that's not something you can be in our tribe. And a lot of people have that problem. Then in your innate orientation is, maybe only over to here, 5, 4.5, 5. Then your outward orientation could easily be that of a heterosexual male. And we see that particular case a lot everywhere. We have congressmen that get caught having their foot under the stall at the airport, and all these people who vote against gay rights, and yet they're eventually found out to have little secrets that they didn't really want anyone to find out about, and they're kind of basically living their lives as a lie. Now, so sexual orientation is most likely not due to any single factor, genetic, hormonal, or cultural, but instead it's a complex interaction of influences. And so let's say you're cruising along in your mom's womb, and she happens to have a lot of stress on her that eats up the testosterone. Testosterone is probably not quite as much of a stress-related hormone as estrogen. Estrogen helps women deal with stress much better than testosterone does. In fact, testosterone actually drives it in men. But let's say something fluctuates and you get exposed to more estrogen than testosterone, and then as you come out, there are all these different influences, your tribal rules, the way your parents treat you, the going to church and all that kind of stuff. And you end up, kind of, well, I was just talking to Christian earlier. I think most of the men that I have met in my practice and my personal friends knew that they were gay. They didn't know that's what they were, but they knew that they had a same-sex preference. They were attracted to men at a very young age, 5 to 7 years old. And I don't know if any of you here were aware of it at that early age, but most men I talked to said that they knew something was going on. They couldn't wait to get home and watch Tarzan or whatever. I know it's a cartoon now, but anyways. But I remember this was in the olden days. I couldn't wait to get home to see Flash Gordon's shirt get ripped off by the bad guys, and you just go, oh, you know, just beat him up and take his shirt off and everything, and you didn't know. You thought, and you didn't know what that was. You didn't know that had any particular, you know, you just thought you had an admiration for the male physique. So now, same-sex orientation is found around the planet among most animals, including fruit flies. It is not binary, which means you got to choose. It's all this way or it's all that way. That's the way we look at it now. You know, some people, I've heard some people say, you've got to make a choice. And, well, you know, and you don't. It's just what you're doing on any particular day. It's the people you meet that you want to have a relationship with. And sometimes it'll be very strong that there's only one sex you're all attracted to. And that's most commonly the way it is. But there is a much broader spectrum of possibilities. So now the fruit fly thing, I was reading an article while I was working on this, and it talked about that, you know, they've done lots of genetic work on fruit flies, and they were testing for the how a certain eye color, white eye color, was passed down. And they found out that a lot of the fruit flies that ended up with a white eye color also just hung out with the males over here. And they would sometimes, the females could be flying around, and once in a while someone would take off, but mostly they just hung out. There could be as many as 6 or 7 of them in a chain there, just hanging on to each other. They had absolutely no interest in the females. And so, you know, this really kind of, if it's fruit flies, this has started way, way back in the history of the planet. And most animals have same-sex preference in their species. And you've heard of all that, you know, the gay penguins and everybody else. So now, your sexual orientation is not your choice, but whether or not you spend your life living up to other people's expectations, that is your choice. And so I encourage you to get out of the box and discover your life, which is the name of the book I just finished, by the way. And it's going to be published, I hope, in the next little bit. So now, one of the things I was going to say, I don't fit the picture for a gay man in any of these things. The thing about the younger males being gay, that and my cousin, my Aunt Marilyn had 13 kids. Unbelievable. But all my gay cousins in that family are right at the end of the family, so they fit real well. And she had, well, there's 2 that are out gay, and there's 1 that should be, but he decided to go that other way, you know. So, but anyway, so, but in my family, I was the oldest, and so I was gay, and each brother got butchered as they went down. So I don't know what happened with my mom. It was all screwed up. And it also is the same way with the X chromosome. When the first studies came out about the XQ28 chromosome, there's all these newspaper headlines. Oh, mothers, see what you did to your kids, and guilt will reign in motherhood forever now, and all that. Well, you know, that was just a really stupid way. And a lot of mothers really do have a lot of guilt, not only because of that, but because of the Freudian thing. You know, they're told by the doctors, oh, you've had too close a relationship with your son, and you didn't get him out, his dad didn't take him out and play ball with him, and all this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of guilt on the parents. So, yes?
What about the role of sexual abuse?
What now?
Sexual abuse.
that's very controversial. There is probably some part of that is that determines sexual orientation. A lot of women who were sexually abused will become lesbians, but a lot of them do not. So, and as far as gay men, I had a friend whose father abused him, but he said, again, it was long after he already knew that he was gay. His father started abusing him when he was 8 or 9, and but he knew by the time he was 5 or 6 that he had a very strong attraction toward men. So, yes.
I was just going to say I can speak to that because I was a sexual abuse counselor for 12 years. In my experiences, that a lot of people came to me with questions like that, about that, and you really go back, the sexual orientation was almost always there first. And it was sometimes coincidental that the abuse happened by a male or a female, or it might have affected whether or not they come out, or things like that, but it was still there, usually, in my experience.
Right. Let me go back to this little thing here. If there's sexual abuse in here somewhere in the mix, it can do two things. It can reinforce a person's sexual orientation that they already had, or it can make them so afraid of whoever the abuser was, that they'll assume that all men are pigs and that they are really attracted to women more. Or it can do just the opposite of that, and that is, I need to find a nice man instead of, if you're a female. And so it adds into this whole thing of vectors. And I don't know, does everyone know what a vector is here? You took physics, didn't you? It's, a lot of times they explained it in early physics class as a horse or a wagon here in the middle, and 4 horses pulling directly east, wherever east is, and 5 horses pulling north. And which way is the wagon going to go? Well, it's going to go northeast at about 3.5 horse rate. So vectors affect us every day. Everything that happens to us is what I call a vector in your life. And where you are right now is the sum of the vectors that have added together. Now, where you are right now, you get to choose what other vectors will be added in to your life. Most people live their lives randomly, letting random vectors and random events come in and act upon them. And they just think that's how life is. That's what life is dealt them. And other people are very much more proactive about it, and they try to choose the vectors that will be added into their lives and so forth. So, but when you're very young and influenced by the people in your life, you don't even know you have an option of choosing your own road, choosing your own vectors at that time. So that's why, and these days I'm just thrilled. I would never imagine when I was younger that in this day and age it would be so easy to be a gay person. But it's still not easy for everybody. I have lots of people who are older people who should kind of see what's going on and go, okay. But they don't understand that. They're still very much stuck in their tribal rules and the memes of their society and all that. And so they get pushed in just the wrong direction. I had one young man that did rotation in my office during his internship, and he was strongly religious in his family, and he ended up going ahead and getting married, which he knew he shouldn't, but he just thought, oh, we need to shut these people up. and he's very miserable now, and he's probably going to end up out of the relationship fairly soon, I would think. So there's a lot of different factors here. But the other thing that just didn't fit in my family was that my mother was an only child, and so I didn't know any cousins on my mother's side, any people at all that were gay. On my father's side, we were just riddled with fabulousness on my father's side. I have so many gay cousins on my father's side. So again, that says that a lot of these factors that we're looking at, they don't act alone at all, you know. And so it's a combination of all different things that brings you to that point. But you now have the option of choosing which path you're going to take, whether you're going to be really feeling like you need to knuckle under to the expectations of others. In my book, there's a chapter called Great Expectations. And we all think that we have to have expectations and that other people have to have expectations of us. And I think that's a very detrimental concept. I think we need to start figuring out that expectations only cause problems. Not only with your children, but with your parents having them of you, and so forth. And so they keep us from choosing a life that we really want to be a part of. And so, okay, any other questions on this? Yes.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, coming in. Okay, I had a question about, you were speaking of the hormones and things affecting the orientation of the child. Have you seen any studies that suggested something like PCOS or any kind of androgen kind of condition of the mother affecting the orientation of the child?
Yes, that's what they did. Is they started to save cord blood a long time ago, and so they could then go back later after they figured out a child's orientation and check for androgen levels in this frozen cord blood, and they did find that there was a higher androgenic level of androgens in cord blood of sons who turned out heterosexual than those who turned out gay. So, but that's where they came, and they still think that that's what, actually I said, they still believe that hormonal influences are very strong in utero. But they don't know exactly how, because again, they found the same thing that we find with all of these things. In some of the cord blood, the androgenic effect was very strong. There were high androgens in the mother's cord blood, but the guy turned out to be gay, and vice versa. So, it's again, we're going to have to put everything together and see. But the point is that it doesn't really matter. We even let people be Republicans in this country, and that's a choice. I mean, it's like, I'm not saying that to knock anybody's political orientation, but it's like there are a lot of things that we protect as a choice in this country that we need to understand that this is also, whether it's a choice or not, it's irrelevant. But if that's what we choose to be, there's no reason why other people, because of religious superstition or because of Queen Victoria way back or whatever, should be punished. And this has held great punishments throughout the ages. In fact, there are still places in the Islamic countries today where they have what they call honor killings, where the parent will stone to death a child that is known to be gay just to save face. They say, well, it's for God. Well, no, it's for your parents who are tired of being embarrassed about the whole thing. So there are in many parts of the world still very, very strong reasons for a child to live an alternative a lifestyle that is alternative to what he feels inside. I have a good friend in Turkey, in Istanbul, Turkey, and he is a college graduate and very brilliant, and he took me on the best tour of Turkey, of the Istanbul area and Ankara and other places. He knew all the history, knew everything about it. And he was very gay, but he had to get married and have one child. And then in their culture, the women always stay at home while the men go out to the restaurants and they have clubs where they go and play cards and do whatever. The men can go out at night, but the women cannot. So it works out fine for gay men. If they get married and have one child, then they're okay. And I asked him, I said, doesn't that ever become a problem? He said, yes. My wife always was calling me on my cell phone, wondering where I am and all this kind of stuff. And he said, but that's just the way it has to be in our society. That hopefully will change over time. So, any other questions? Did you have a question?
Yes, you had mentioned an autistic young girl who had an infection. Is there a higher prevalence in the autistic population?
Gay or straight?
Yes.
I don't know that. I never have read anything about it. Has anybody else ever read anything? I've never heard about that. I did read an article once called The Insanity Gene, and it talked about children who had febrile illnesses when they were small, and there was two brothers. Also, one had a febrile illness, and he was really held back for a long time. But he eventually caught up with his other brother by the time he was 8 or 9 years old, and seemed to be doing okay. However, as that kid who had been sick got to be around 18 or 19, he started showing signs of schizophrenia. And what they think is that these febrile illnesses are also, or some other infectious factor, are also part of what I call the mysterious illnesses, things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, post-polio syndrome, Gulf War syndrome, that somehow the methyl groups get knocked off codons that they shouldn't be knocked off of. Some scientists feel that at least 40% of our genetic material is old retroviral sequences from hundreds of thousands of years back. There's been retroviruses like the AIDS virus around for a long, long time. And they look at these sequences and they all look like retroviral sequences. So these are obviously things that should not be coded for. So you should have methyl or carboxyl group, on top of it. But when you get certain viruses and you get febrile illnesses, it will knock these methyl groups off, and your body will start making peptides that it doesn't know what to do with. And that's why things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, they're such an all-encompassing illness. So, yes.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment about that, because I have an autoimmune disease as well, and so does my daughter. She has Lyme disease, and it looks like the microorganisms themselves cause that to occur. The viruses, the genetic mutations.
Well, that's what the article was saying. The article was saying, and I think there is, in, for instance, chronic fatigue syndrome, I think there is a herpes family virus. It's at least a DNA virus, we know for sure, because you can very easily treat these mysterious illnesses with cidofovir, which is an antiviral that hits DNA viruses. And I had several patients who were HIV positive and who had chronic fatigue syndrome. And when they got treated for CMV retinitis with cidofovir, all their chronic fatigue syndrome symptoms went away for a year, year and a half. But of course, it's very toxic to the kidneys. They have a new form of that called CMX001 that's hopefully going to be out soon. That is a liposomal kind of thing where it targets only what it needs to and it doesn't attack the kidney. So we'll see maybe if that's helpful.
That's very interesting. 98% of the U.S. population has herpes, and
Well,
about 95% has Epstein-Barr.
Right, but I think this is actually probably a herpes virus we haven't even discovered yet, because when you do an Epstein-Barr panel on a chronic fatigue syndrome patient, the IgM, which is the first thing that would normally go up, you never see it ever. But the IgG VCA, viral capsid antigen titer, goes up, and it just stays up here the rest of their lives, And so whether it's really Epstein-Barr that causes it, they don't think now. But it could be another herpes family virus in there. We didn't even know that Kaposi sarcoma in AIDS patients was caused by a herpes family virus until about 15 years ago. And so I think there are viruses still yet undiscovered. So. Yes.
Can we go to Jennifer? She's had her hand up.
Oh, back here. Sorry.
So when we were talking about some of the hormonal influences, I was just curious whether you were finding that the gay male growing up had less testosterone compared to a straight one. Is that what that study?
No, I'm not saying that necessarily. They were exposed to less testosterone in utero is the theory. Now that's what they're concluding from some of these studies, but not necessarily does the gay male. We know that there are a lot of very athletic gay men, and so that's not the only factor. We're about to the end of our time. So any other questions here? Would anyone have any interest sometime in seeing what the early days of HIV looks like? Some of you have probably already seen the lecture. So maybe some other day, a few months from now.
Yeah, we'd really like that if you could come back, because I think that's a whole other, awesome discussion that I'd want to hear you speak more on. So.
It's very interesting. We don't even see this anymore. But if any of you work with populations, say you work with Black people, Hispanic people, you may actually see some of these things presenting. And if you're not familiar with them, you will completely miss the diagnosis. You'll say, oh, they have a itchy rash, it's probably something they got exposed to or whatever, some kind of chemical or allergen. But we'll do that maybe another time. I think that'd be an interesting topic. But I hope that none of this is really relevant to anybody in the room today. That this is just, okay, that's there, but that you're to the point where it doesn't make any difference in the way you feel about yourself, the way that other people's expectations of you, you have got to realize that they should not be what is creating your lives. You need to start having your own expectations and just go with what you are. And that is not always set in stone, as some people think, but just whatever place you are in at the moment, that's perfectly fine. You're very much allowed to do that. Any other questions?
Questions or comments or anything that you want to share?
Comments from your own
We've got 5 minutes.
that you had that any of this connects with? Okay. Well, thanks very much. I've enjoyed it, and we'll talk about early HIV disease some other time.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.